Have you ever wondered a quiet presence that settles into the corners of a home once filled with the soft music of a mother's laughter, but now it's just him and me, the walls remembering her before the story begins? If you're ready to claim your silent confidence, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Claim my space below. Let's continue this journey together. Now, let's begin. He holds me with eyes that try not to show the weight he carries. But I feel it each time he smiles, just a little too late or lingers in a moment, a second too long. Welcome to my channel, Philosophy of Stoicism. It's in those pauses that something else stirs, something unnamed, something that hums low like a whisper, only we can hear, vibrating beneath the routine we've built. I don't know when it started. I only know that I feel more alive in his quiet glances than in anything else the world has ever given me. It had been a year since we lost her, a whole year of learning how to exist without the woman who held us both together without trying. She was grace, warmth, and everything kind, and her absence turned the air colder even when the sun was shining. We didn't talk about the grief much. He wasn't the kind of man who spilled pain in words. He wore it like a second skin, silent, heavy, enduring, but in that silence, something else began to bloom. It was never spoken, never touched directly, but it was always there like the smell of earth after the rain, quiet but impossible to ignore. I remember one night it was raining outside, the kind of rain that drowns out everything else, wrapping the world in a soft curtain of sound. I had trouble sleeping like many nights before and made my way downstairs for some tea. The light in the kitchen was on, and there he was. His back turned, hands resting on the counter, staring into nothing. He turned when he heard me, and our eyes met. Neither of us said anything for a moment. That's how it always began, stillness. Then something almost too intimate in its simplicity. Couldn't sleep? He asked. He nodded. You too. He exhaled softly, and the way his shoulders moved felt like a quiet confession. I think I missed the sound of her voice most at night. He said. His voice cracked just slightly, and it pulled at something deep inside me. I didn't answer right away. I walked over, poured a cup for both of us, and handed him his. Our fingers brushed. The contact was nothing really, just skin on skin for half a second, but it stole my breath. He held the cup with both hands like it gave him something to do, something to ground him. You've grown strong, he murmured. She'd be proud. The warmth in those words melted into my chest. So have you, he gave a small distant smile, eyes searching mine like he was trying to find something that had been lost long ago. That night we didn't talk much after that, but the silence said enough. We stood side by side, sipping tea, listening to the rain wrapped in something invisible yet undeniable. I went back to my room after a while, but the heat of his nearness stayed with me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to name what I was feeling. Couldn't. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right either. Just was time kept moving forward, as it always does. Seasons changed life, settled into new rhythms. I started taking on more around the house, cooking, handling errands, keeping him company. When the silence threatened to grow too loud, he began to linger more at the kitchen table on the porch. By my side, his conversations grew softer, more personal. He would ask me about my dreams, my memories, the things I loved. Not like a father checking in. No, it was different. Felt like he wanted to know me. Not as his daughter, me one evening in early spring. I found him in the backyard, watching the trees sway under the breeze. The light was golden, casting long shadows. He was sitting on the bench, lost in thought, fingers clasped tightly like he was holding something fragile and afraid to drop it. Mind if I join gasp? He glanced up, then nodded with a smile that softened everything inside me. We sat close, closer than usual. The air between us was charged with something unspeakable. Neither of us dared break it. You remind me of her, he whispered after a while. But you're not her. You're something entirely your own stronger, maybe more alive. My breath caught. I turned toward him slowly, unsure what to say. My chest ached in that beautiful way you feel when something real brushes too close to the surface. He looked away quickly as though he'd said too much. I rested my hand gently on his. You don't have to apologize. His hand didn't move away. It stayed there, warm beneath mine, his fingers twitching slightly before curling around mine. In return, I felt that touch deep in places I couldn't name. It's not wrong, I said quietly. It's just complicated. He looked at me, then really looked, and in his eyes, I saw years of love, grief, and something blooming through the cracks. Something unexpected. I don't know when it happened. He said, I only know that. When you walk into a room, everything feels a little easier to bear. I swallowed hard. I feel the same. That was all. No declarations, no dramatic moments, just truth exchanged in the fading light. That night, I found myself standing outside his bedroom door. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to check on him. Maybe I wanted him to check on me, but I didn't knock. I stood there a long time listening to the quiet. Then I returned to my room, heart pounding, filled with something that felt both dangerous and deeply comforting. The days that followed were tender in a strange way. We moved around each other like two magnets, unsure whether to pull together or stay apart. Our conversations grew softer, our silences deeper. He started touching me more, not in obvious ways, but light brushes on my shoulder, a lingering hand on my back, a squeeze of my fingers when he passed me a plate. Each one said more than any words ever could. I remember a day when I was cooking dinner, and he stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him along my side. You've become the heartbeat of this home, he said quietly. I turned to him, surprised. You say things sometimes that sound like poetry. He chuckled. You inspire them? I blushed, turning back to the stove. But my hands trembled that night. We ate together with candles lit, just the two of us. Not for romance, not intentionally, but everything about it felt like it. We didn't speak much. The flicker of the flame danced in his eyes, and every time he looked at me, it felt like a secret was being passed between us. After dinner, I reached out to clear the plates, but he gently placed his hand over mine, stopping me. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For what? For staying, for being, for letting me feel. Again, I didn't know how to respond. My throat was tight. My eyes burned. I nodded and stepped back, our hands separating like a slow goodbye. But it wasn't goodbye. It was only the beginning of something we couldn't yet name. Later, I sat by my window, watching the moon rise, and wondered what it meant to love someone, not because of who they're supposed to be, but because of who they are. He had been everything: protector, provider, shadow in my storms. But now he was something else, too, something tender and quietly aching inside my chest. The world would never understand this, but maybe it didn't have to. Maybe it was enough that he and I understood that our hearts found each other, not in chaos, but in quiet, and in that quiet, something beautiful waited. The night crept in slowly, like it was trying not to startle the quiet that had settled between us. Over the past few weeks, the days had become more than just routines. Now, they were soft dances around feelings we couldn't name, where every glance felt like it held 1,000 unspoken truths. I began noticing the smallest things, how his voice shifted when he spoke just to me, how his presence made the room feel full, even in silence, how his hands brushed mine like he didn't mean to, but never really pulled away. We had stopped pretending that the world around us hadn't changed. Maybe it hadn't in the way others would expect, but between us, something was growing, not loud or sudden, but steady, like light finding its way through a thick forest. One evening, I walked into the living room to find him asleep on the couch. His arm was draped over his chest, brow slightly furrowed, as if, even in sleep, he carried something too heavy to set down. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Something in me ached to touch him, to ease whatever weight he bore. I reached for the blanket folded at the end of the couch and gently laid it over him. But as I did, his eyes fluttered open, not startled lave. "I didn't mean to wake you," I whispered. He blinked a few times before offering a slow smile. "You didn't think I was waiting for you?" There was something in the way he said it, as if sleep had dropped the walls he usually kept between us. I sat down on the edge of the couch, unsure what I was doing, only that it felt natural. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "what it would feel like to just let go of all the things we think we shouldn't feel?" My heart tightened. All the time. His hand reached for mine. It was a small movement, not rehearsed, not hesitant. His fingers wrapped around mine like they'd been waiting for that moment for far too long. "I've spent my whole life following rules," he said, "doing what's expected, loving the right way, grieving the right way." He looked at me, then deeply. "But none of that ever prepared me for how I feel when I look at you." I didn't respond. Couldn't. The words sat on my tongue like petals too fragile to speak. Instead, I turned my hand in his, let my fingers find the spaces between his, and held on. It wasn't wrong. What we felt, it was just outside the lines others had drawn. But what we were growing into, was born from grief and rebuilt with care. It wasn't about replacing her, it wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding a way to live again. The days grew warmer, spring gave way to early summer, and everything seemed to bloom. Trees, flowers, even the way he smiled. He smiled more now, and I caught myself smiling back more than I ever had. We spent afternoons outside reading together, talking about everything and nothing. I learned things I never knew about him. His love for classical music, how he used to paint before life took that from him, and how he'd always been afraid of being alone. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said one afternoon while we sat under the porch, the sky stretching endlessly above us. "Not when you're here." There was a tenderness in his voice that wrapped itself around me like sunlight. "I used to think love had to follow a script," he continued, "but maybe the deepest kind of love is the kind that doesn't need to explain itself." I turned to him, heart pounding. "Is that what this is?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time he didn't look away. "Yes," he said simply, "it is." There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, just quiet truth between two hearts that had been through enough to know when something real was standing in front of them. That night, something shifted. He stood at my bedroom door, not out of hesitation, but because the space between us no longer made sense. We didn't speak. He didn't need to ask, and I didn't need to answer. I stepped forward, and for a moment we just stood there, breathing the same air, heart steady and unsure. His hand rose, slowly brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. His thumb lingered for a moment, warm against my skin. "You mean everything," he whispered, "more than I ever thought I could feel again." I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, letting the moment wrap around me. There was no need to cross lines, no need to name what couldn't be spoken aloud. The connection we shared lived in the spaces between touches, in the quiet smiles and stolen glances. It was pure in its complexity, sacred in its silence. He stayed with me that night, not in the way stories usually tell it, but in the way that mattered most. He sat by my bed, hand in mine, as we spoke, until our voices turned to whispers and whispers into breath. I fell asleep with his fingers curled gently around mine, feeling safer than I ever had the next morning. I woke to find him still there, half asleep, holding on as though afraid the night would vanish. "Morning," I said softly. He opened his eyes and smiled, and eyes full of something I couldn't describe, but knew deeply I didn't want to leave. He murmured, "Then don't." We spent the next few weeks living in a space that felt both familiar and completely new. Every meal was shared, every glance carried meaning. We never spoke too much of the depth growing between us, but it lived there quietly. We knew what the world might say. If they saw it, we knew the rules, the expectations, but we also knew the truth that lived in our hearts, that sometimes love finds its way in the least expected places, not in rebellion, but in healing. He never tried to define it, and I never needed him to. What we had was ours. Anal, real, unwritten. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. He reached over and laced his fingers through mine. "I don't know what tomorrow will look like," he said, "but I know I want you in it." I rested my head on his shoulder. That's all I've ever wanted, and in that moment, the world felt quiet again, but not empty. It was full of everything we had survived, everything we had become. The grief no longer stood between us. It had shaped us, molded our hearts into something softer, something stronger, and now wrapped in the golden light of another ending day. I knew we had found something rare. Not just love, but the kind of love that didn't need to be explained. Only felt. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to Philosophy of Stoicism for more real, relatable advice on navigating the complexities of love and relationships. Remember, relationships take time, care, and effort, but the rewards are worth it. When fear and caution are met with understanding and patience, they transform into trust and connection. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.